All right, we've got reporters standing by across the country to give you the latest on this evolving COVID situation. First to Sky News reporter Gabriella Power in Melbourne on this new hard lockdown for Victoria. Gabriella, talk us through today's announcement.
Peter, there's less than 6 hours to go until all of Victoria is thrown into a hard Stage 4 lockdown once again for 5 days. Authorities say that this is needed as they desperately try and get on top of this outbreak that has seeped into the community from the Holiday Inn quarantine hotel. I'll take you through the restrictions. From midnight tonight, all Victorians must stay home, and that controversial 5-kilometre rule is back. The only reasons you can leave is for shopping, for essential work, to give and receive care and for exercise. Face masks are mandatory once again at all times. That's for both indoor and outdoor settings. Schools will close, so children will once again have to learn from home. Funerals can go ahead, but with a maximum of 10 people. Weddings will have to be cancelled or postponed. The hospitality sector will, of course, be taking a hit. All restaurants, pubs and cafes will shut, but they can offer takeaway. Now, Peter, as you know, this is a huge blow to all Victorians. So many businesses will have to close. I spoke to some locals earlier today. Before the news broke, some residents couldn't believe it as they were under the impression that the government had this outbreak under control. And after the announcement, I was out in the city speaking to some people. Some were naturally furious. They couldn't believe that the Australian Open could still go ahead while they will have to stay home and they won't be able to work. Some said that they couldn't tell me what they really thought while on camera, and others, of course, didn't believe that this would last for 5 days. Take a listen.
Look, I'm not enjoying it. If I really wanted to say what I was going to say, you probably wouldn't put it on TV, but I've had enough of him. It's just got too much. He's got to man up and own up to it. He should follow Eddie Maguire's lead, and a couple of those blokes from the Crown Board follow his lead. He's had his time. He's done enough. It's time for someone else to come in and just point us in the right direction.
We're angry. We feel sorry for the restaurants, the shopkeepers, everybody else, and bye-bye to Dan, hopefully one day.
What about yourself?
Well, hopefully they'll remember in 2 years when it comes to voting time how many people are going to go broke over this whole situation. It's disgusting.
I'm a bit disappointed about it because I think that there are better models. The New South Wales model of doing very targeted areas would be a better response, and I think what Daniel Andrews has done is wrong.
And how do you think the government's handled it?
I think they handled it pretty well. Yeah, I guess we just got to stick to it and we'll be all right, we'll get out of it.
It's only 5 days, can't be that bad.
And Gab, there's breaking news too in the last half an hour or so on returning overseas travellers. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Peter, in news just in, the Andrews government has confirmed that it will stop all international flights from entering Victoria from tomorrow. The government has released a statement. I'll read it to you. It says, "We've paused all international passenger flights from tomorrow, excluding those already in transit. We know this will be difficult news for people who are overseas and want to get home, but our focus right now has to be taking this short, sharp action." Interesting that this announcement comes after today's press conference. Today, the Premier said that we have to have a cold, hard discussion about hotel quarantine and how many overseas arrivals we accept back into Australia. He made the suggestion that we should only be accepting a few hundred Australians that need to get home for compassionate grounds. But that is certainly a big statement to make, considering there's more than 40,000 Australians still stuck overseas, Peter.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and I've got the numbers. To date, New South Wales has taken 124,800 travellers. Victoria's only taken 35,000, so it'll still be a very big imbalance there, particularly if he shuts down the system. Gab, I'll just stay with you. Just one question. I noticed in the press conference today he was pretty cranky with questions about comments he'd made at the start of the week saying, this is such a good system in Victoria, it's the gold standard, it's so good, everyone's copying it. He seemed under pressure today.
It's interesting, isn't it? It was only a few days ago that he was boasting about Victoria being the gold standard, saying that Victoria has higher standards than New South Wales when it comes to hotel quarantine. And as you pointed out, New South Wales is really doing the heavy lifting. New South Wales is about to take 3,000 passengers a week, whereas Victoria will be now not accepting international arrivals, and we've seen the Holiday Inn quarantine hotel shut, and so we will have to see what happens there. He did become, I suppose, was quite frustrated with some questions. He really set the tone, a quite serious tone, of course, seeing as we are going into lockdown. But he really didn't want to, I suppose, admit that line that Victoria is the best hotel quarantine model in the country. He was peppered with questions before about what states are actually copying his model. He said they all are, and I suppose now we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't think anyone around the country, indeed the world, would be copying the last couple of days here in Victoria and what faces Victorians for the next 5 days. I want to just show you some of the extremes of what's happening in Australia tonight, because in Sydney, and we'll go there now to Charlotte Mortlock, residents are enjoying what they've dubbed Freedom Friday today. So forget all the lockdowns in Victoria, Charlotte. You're opening up restaurants and pubs and capacities increasing tonight. Freedom Friday, what are the changes?
Yeah, Peter, it is a good day here in Sydney. Certainly for Greater Sydney, we have seen restrictions easing overnight. The 4 square metre rule has been slashed to 2 square metres. Face masks will no longer be mandatory in beauty salons, in shops or in places of worship. You will still need to wear them if you are catching public transport. But Peter, it has been a fairly horrifying 12 months for our hospitality industry because of this pandemic. And this latest round of changes is actually going to mean that cafes and restaurants, most of them, will be able to double their capacity, injecting around $75 million into the economy each week. Today marked our 26th day in a row without any locally acquired cases. So this is something that many people down here in Bondi this evening are making the most of, enjoying those freedoms.
All right, just before we go, what's going to happen to anyone who was passing through Melbourne Airport that's ended up back in Sydney? Has there been any announcements from your government tonight?
Yeah, Peter, there has. So the most important thing to note is that at this stage, New South Wales is not closing the border to Victoria. Interestingly, Victoria is actually the only state that New South Wales has ever closed its border to, and that's when there are around 150 cases per day. So we are still quite a while off that. But the New South Wales Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, has issued a directive, and that is for anyone who has arrived in New South Wales from January 29th, so some 2 weeks ago. They must go into that 5-day draconian lockdown just like everyone else in Victoria. The New South Wales Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet, spoke to Sky News this morning. Now, he was talking about the restrictions easing. He said that anyone, certainly in this lockdown, that we can't keep going into lockdowns every time that there is a small outbreak, because the ramifications to businesses and to the economy could be just as severe as what we see for the health risks.
We've invested a significant amount in our state on our health response. I think our tracking and tracing teams here are probably the best in the world, and they get on top of it very quickly. But we can't just keep going into lockdown every single time there's a few cases, because the downstream impacts on businesses and confidence across the board will potentially be more severe than the problem we're trying to tackle.
Peter, as you and Gab were just discussing there, earlier this week, Dan Andrews did say that Victoria had the highest standards of hotel quarantine. This morning, the New South Wales Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet, said, well, if that's the case, why aren't they taking more returning travellers?
Absolutely. Huge contrast, never more apparent than tonight between the two states there. Gabriella Power, Charlotte Mortlock, thanks for joining me tonight on Credlin.